Last week, Governor Whitmer signed universal background checks and safe storage into law. The House passed the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill, which was previously passed by the Senate, and we expect the governor's signature shortly. These are the laws that the community demanded after the tragedies at Oxford, at Michigan State, and the daily violence that so many communities face. We demanded that they be passed in the first 100 days of Governor Whitmer's term, and I'm proud to say that they were signed right on time. When students, parents, teachers, survivors, and faith leaders all organize together, we can win. Today, we're going to celebrate this victory and hear from several leaders and legislators who are absolutely critical to that achievement. With us today are Celeste Kanpurwala, who is the Michigan chapter lead of Moms Demand Action, Kermit Williams, the executive director of Oakland Forward, State Representative Brenda Carter, who is the co-chair of the Legislative Gun Violence Prevention Caucus, and I'd like to introduce Senator Rosemary Bayer, who has been our champion on this issue in the Senate. Senator Bayer, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Yes, I am State Senator Rosemary Bayer, and I'm thrilled to finally be celebrating this first legislative steps forward to reducing gun violence, making Michigan safer for our friends, our family members, and really mostly for our kids. I have been the chair of the Firearm Safety Caucus, Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention Caucus for the last few years, and we have made some steps forward finally, but we've been trying to pass versions of these bills for the last 8 or 10 years. We knew that we could never stop. It's just too important. It's literally life and death. And so we kept the fight up. We kept making the bills better. And we have much more to do, but we have many more people working on it these days. So it's kind of exciting to go forward. But right now, we pushed, and we are celebrating, because really, this gun violence thing has become an epidemic, and it continues to get worse. It is the #1 cause of death for children across the country, including Michigan, and incidences are still rising. Firearm suicide rates are climbing in a terrifying way. It is way past time to get this situation under control, and we are finally actually taking some of those first steps. And because of the work of community organizations, student groups, my colleagues, our leaders and staff in the House and Senate, the strength of the Attorney General and the governor and her office, finally, we have moved this forward. I want to reiterate that community force really is what has gotten us to where we could change the laws, where we could actually do more. Without changing the leadership in the House and the Senate, we would still be in that same position of introducing bills that never get hearings and never get votes. So we have at least changed these laws. We've changed the laws to add universal background checks to make sure that there is a background check before every kind of gun purchase, not just handguns, to keep all the guns out of the hands of all the people who should not have them. That needs to be a fundamental goal for us, and we have that law in effect next year, already signed by the governor. We've also changed the laws to ensure that kids can't get guns and shoot themselves or someone else. Make sure that gun owners take those basic safety measures to keep their firearms locked safely away, protecting themselves and all those around them, and we will hold them accountable if they do not. We also know that 2/3 of the firearm deaths are suicide, and soon we expect to have the new extreme risk protection orders signed into law that will protect people who are likely to harm themselves or others. This legislation has proven effective in reducing suicide in other states, and this will save lives in Michigan also. Together, these laws are fundamental to making Michigan a state where we are all safe, especially our kids. I want to thank my colleagues, the leadership of the caucus, outside experts, organizations who represent so many of our people, the Attorney General, Governor's office, and all the young people who have been in growing numbers speaking out so strongly, so bravely. I lived in Oxford. I represented Oxford during the time of the school shooting there. I had family members in the school. I was that community is lodged in my soul, and that event will never, ever leave me. The students in Oxford are amazing. The students at Michigan State are amazing. Through this horrible pain, through the unbelievable challenges faced with something like this happening to you, your friends, your community, those kids rallied and supported each other, supported the community. And then they jumped up and started speaking more loudly, organizing their efforts, making schools safe again. We had March for Our Lives group, but in Oxford, they actually created their own group called No Future Without Today, and they are out and about. We've seen them in Lansing. We've had MSU kids, Oxford students coming in and speaking in Lansing, speaking at hearings, just sitting on the steps of the Capitol day after day to make sure that people were listening to them, that we couldn't help but hear them this time. So I was incredibly proud to be standing with them just a few days ago as Governor Whitmer signed the first sets of bills into law. Their example is inspiring to me. It's inspiring to the whole generation of young people as they lead us forward. These students have been the heart and soul of this movement and really, truly are bringing a brighter future for all of Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bayer, and thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. Now I'm going to hand things over to all of our friend and an inspiring leader herself, Celeste Kanpurwala from Moms Demand Action. Celeste?
Yes, thanks, Ryan. It's good to be here, everybody. And I am still on an emotional high from last Thursday, standing on stage with such incredible leaders and being a part of historic gun bill signing by our governor. And so as I spoke about on Thursday, I'm remembering all the times that I visited Lansing over the past 7 years that I volunteered with Moms Demand Action, all the legislators I've met with, and the precious moments with my children, all while advocating for gun safety laws. And as Senator Bayer touched on, these legislators in the past dodged our questions and our concerns. They didn't take time to listen to our stories, but now we have this gun safety legislation put in place, and we know that the House also voted on red flag law bill last Thursday while we were there for our Moms Demand Action Advocacy Day last week. And so we are making change. We're getting it done thanks to our incredible gun sense legislators and our gun sense champion of a governor. So they are showing us that they care about people like me, a grieving daughter whose dad Scott took his life 9 years ago, just this past Easter, just over a week ago, with his shotgun. People like my friend Mia Reed, who's a part of End Gun Violence Michigan as well, and has an organization in her son Charles' name, who was murdered in Detroit. People like my incredible friends Rick and Martha O'Million in Kalamazoo, whose daughter Maggie was shot and killed by her ex-boyfriend in 1999. And people like my sweet friend Pam Ladline, whose daughter Michelle was struck by a stray bullet on the 4th of July and later died in the hospital. And of course, we will never forget the loved ones of Brian, Ariel, and Alexandria stolen by gun violence in East Lansing at Michigan State University while just trying to get an education and grow up to enact change. And of course, Madison, Tate, Justin, and Hannah in Oxford. As I stated last week, and I'll state again, we are not just statistics. We're real people. We represent the majority of Americans who are asking for change and who are demanding change. And I also just want to add today that while we have made these incredible gun bills a part of our Michigan legislature and what we've got going on here in this incredible state, we know that we are only as safe as the weakest state's gun laws. And we saw over the weekend, we saw a Sweet 16 birthday party that and unfolded in tragedy in Alabama, as well as a young boy who innocently rang the wrong doorbell in Missouri and was shot in a racist white supremacist killing. And so we fight every single day. I know that we're here representing in Michigan, but again, we're only as safe as our weakest gun laws. So we're going to keep pushing. Our hashtag at Moms Demand Action is keep going. And so we are going to keep pushing for change. And I always ask people to be bold, be brave, because if you don't do something, who will? And with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Kermit Williams, who is the co-director of Oakland Forward.
Thank you, Celeste, and thank everyone for being here. I am Kermit Williams, co-director of Oakland Forward. We engage, equip, and empower residents through self-determination to collectively revitalize communities of color. I'm here on this call to talk about how we got to this point. We held over 50 different community meetings all the way from Detroit to Marquette. We met over 100 different legislators and meetings to make sure they knew where we stood on these issues of end gun violence and gun safety in the community. We had students that sat in, that protested, that marched, and then we had a broad coalition. Groups like End Gun Violence Michigan, Celeste for Moms Demand Action, along with Mia and others, the Methodist Church that stepped up. We really had a collection of people that came together to make this happen, not only in the state. And I'm happy and proud to say we have broken the stranglehold that the NRA has had on our state, has had on our legislators, because now we are on the right political side. And so beginning to move these gun laws to a safer, more constructive Michigan is only the beginning step, but it happened because we had powerful legislators like Senator Rosemary Bayer, State Representative Brenda Carter, who co-chair our gun safety commissions and that caucus. The one thing that I want to really point out, though, is what needs to happen now is we are the political majority. These laws have 90%, 80% community support that we've been pushing for, and it's really common sense legislation. But the only way it's going to affect our communities if we continue to fight, continue to push, and continue to change the narrative of what it looks like to be safe. Our coalition had one other piece that I don't think gets highlighted enough. We had responsible gun owners on our side working with us every day, back to back. But it's important that everybody knows that this just didn't happen in an island. Every county in the state was focused on how we made this happen and how we could actually bring about real change in our community. And so the first time in a long time, our legislators actually did something to make us safer. And so I want to commend them. I want to honor them. But it happened because community groups, grassroots groups, faith leaders, students, moms all came together and said not only is enough, but we needed to end gun violence now, and we needed to make sure that Michigan is safer. But it gives me a great honor and a great privilege to introduce my state representative, Brenda Carter, who has been championing gun violence and gun safety ever since she's been elected, and she's going to continue to do that. And so I want to be the first to thank you, State Representative Carter, for making sure that gun safety happened in Michigan. And now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kermit, for those kind words and all that you've done. Many have heard my story about why I'm so passionate about gun violence. It bears repeating again, because even at this moment that we're celebrating, we still mourn people that we lost. Of course, I'm a survivor. As I was mourning the loss of my nephew, Randy, who died in 2011, I was fighting for gun violence. But little did I know that in 2019, gun violence would be one of the things that contributed to my only son's death, Brian. It was at that point that I became extremely passionate because no mother, no father, no family member should have to bury a child, let alone stand the grief and the pain that comes from being a survivor. I am so proud to be standing here with you today and finally honor the innocent victims of gun violence. As Governor Whitmer said, the time of answering the senseless death of our loved ones with only thoughts and prayers is over. We are meeting the challenge with laws. These laws will literally save hundreds of lives. When I think about the parents like myself who will be spared the horror of attending their child's funeral, it is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming experience, this feeling. I am overwhelmed at the relief and gratitude that we are able to spare them that pain. And yet, I know why these laws are necessary at all, and the pain of knowing that they will not save every life. I want to make two important points here. The passage of these laws isn't just about gun violence, as you said, it's about democracy. These laws were supported by more than 80%, sometimes over 90% of Michiganders. How could it be that in the wake of horrible school shootings, the previous legislature would not even give them a hearing? That's not democracy. That's not the way democracy is supposed to work. Voters say that the spectacle of legislators refusing even to debate the solution to gun violence and decided they wanted to change. Well, voters in Michigan, you are getting the change that you voted for. I am proud that our caucus heard your pain and acted upon it. We are finally standing on the side of the people, not the gun industry. The second point is about the path forward, as Kermit, you mentioned, and how these laws will become reality in people's lives. We will be working very closely with the administration and the community groups to implement these new rules. Funding will be made shortly available for law enforcement and community groups. We must work together to educate every parent about the safe storage requirements and get them access to gun locks and gun lock boxes. Schools and daycares should be informing parents about these rules now. We will be working closely with doctors and hospitals. Pediatricians should be informing new patients about these laws and providing them with safety resources. We must work together to educate the public, law enforcement, and mental health professionals about the red flag law. People need to understand how to make a report. School counselors and school safety officers are able to make reports, for example. These professionals need training on how to identify a young person in crisis and how to use the law. And importantly, we need to make sure that the community leaders and law enforcement are working together to implement red flag laws in our cities. Let me be plain. It's no secret that there is often tension between law enforcement and communities of color in our state. And yet, we are asking community members to trust that calling the police to disarm a family member will de-escalate a crisis rather than to do more harm. It is critical that civil society work together with law enforcement to ensure that these laws are implemented in a way that the community can trust. So we need a whole of society effort to make sure that the promise of these laws is kept. They will not be worth the paper they were written on if we do not seriously invest in their implementation. So for the person who is out there that is asking, what can I do? Go to your school board. Ask them what they are doing to prepare parents for safe storage. Go to your city council. Ask them how they are preparing their police department for the red flag law. Go to your pediatrician. Ask them to tell their patients about safe storage. Believe it or not, passage of these laws was the easy part. Now we need to go through every nook and cranny of society and make them real. I am optimistic because, as Kermit mentioned, we now have this huge moment working together. That is a game changer. I want to close by thanking the movement. Organizations like Oakland Forward, No Future Without Today, Moms Demand Action, Sit Down MSU, End Gun Violence Michigan, the Giffords, and so many more. I like to throw in there Pontiac Universal Crimes and that marvelous organization by Delia Sharp. So there we go. Your activism made this possible. And like me, many of you are survivors who have turned your grief into action. Thank you for standing up, speaking the truth to power, and holding us in the legislature accountable. I know that we have many more victories ahead of us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Carter, both for joining us today and for your relentless leadership in the legislature. As Kermit said, as advocates, we need champions, and you and Senator Bayer have been our partners, our allies, and our champions all these years when it seemed impossible that these laws would pass, and when we had a window of opportunity, you were there with us. So thank you so much for your dedication and for your leadership. We have time for questions from the press. If folks have questions, you can raise your hand or go into chat, and we will do Q&A. Not all at once. Okay, Sam from Mears is asking a question. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, perfect. Hello. Thank you so much for hosting this press event. I appreciate it. My question is, you were obviously able to make quite a bit of success with these 3 major proposals. What happens next? What are some other things you're envisioning for your firearm policy agenda as 2023 continues?
Representative Carter, do you want to take that one?
Oh, yes, I can tell you that we are still working on a plethora of laws. Safe storage is one of the things that we're looking at. Of course, we passed that into law, but now we're looking at working with our schools. I know for sure that we have panic alarm buttons that we're looking at implementing in our schools, as well as making sure that teachers and our staff are properly trained if they're in an emergency situation. As far as our communities are concerned, we recognize that the mass shootings are not the only shootings that happen. We have shootings day to day, has been proven in Louisville and then now in Tennessee, and we have them all over the country where there are the day-to-day occurrences in our communities. So we're looking at those incidents of gun violence as well. So we're very optimistic. I was hoping that Senator Bayer was here also, and I would like to take this time to formally thank Senator Bayer for taking the leadership of what she did as the chair of the Firearms Safety and Gun Violence Prevention Caucus, and the hard work she did and the dedication, including Oxford, which was one of her school district, one of the schools in her district. So we have a lot of things on the agenda right now. We are not stopping. We have the executive side being focused. We have I believe we do have bipartisan support, even though it's not noticeable. But we are working on this, and we've got a lot of things in the hopper.
What about magazine restrictions? I know that legislation has been introduced in the past. I've heard some speculation that the data just wasn't all there for it for this term. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, in the last session, I was one of the people who introduced it once again, along with my partner, Senator Rosemary Bayer, the magazine gun capacity, where we were limiting the rounds to just 10 instead of what we have right now. We plan on reintroducing that legislation. And as many people on this call have stated, previous legislation, legislators, I'm in my third term now, and we got no movement at all. We didn't get a hearing. We didn't get anything. But now we are very optimistic that a lot of things that we tried to implement that could have saved countless lives if we could have got that magazine gun capacity passed, will pass this session. So this is another one that I'll probably end up taking up.
Celeste, you had a priority, I think, around CVI you wanted to mention.
Well, and so I want to say a couple of things, folks. First of all, remember that we are starting from nothing here. We're starting from the bottom up. So I see a question in the chat about banning assault rifles, and we, of course, support that. But let's remember that we have to start from the very beginning. And one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, that I know I messaged Ryan about, that I just want to touch on just a little bit, only because my dad, before he took his life with his firearm, was unfortunately a domestic abuser. And so we are looking to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers as well. I mean, we know that, of course, assault rifles are a threat to folks, but we know that handguns and, long shotguns and things like that are used a lot more frequently. And so if we can just make sure that people who are posing a threat to their loved ones and to their partners don't have access to firearms, that is a huge win for us. If we can get that on the agenda, that's something that we're really prioritizing at Moms Demand Action, not only here in Michigan, but across the country. And so I just want to put that out there. And then also, of course, as Representative Carter was talking about with the community violence that takes place, yes, we absolutely support community violence intervention services as well, making sure that we have funding for community violence intervention. I live in Ann Arbor, where here in Washtenaw County, we have a wonderful organization called Garrett Space that was founded by a grieving couple. They are looking to build, they were granted millions of dollars to build a facility to help young folks who are struggling with mental health issues. And the community is now kind of fighting the build of this facility because they're not educated about it, and they are worried about their community. And so it takes education, it takes funding, it takes, we're all in this together. So with that said, I just wanted to make it clear that, again, we're starting from the bottom up here, y'all. So let's first celebrate the wins that we have, and then exactly. And then we can do this incrementally, but we're not going to enact these huge, victories without starting from the bottom up.
And Celeste, let me piggyback on what you're saying there. First of all, I really appreciate your insight on, yes, we are, after 40 years of being suppressed, now we're able to push ahead the people's will, the will of the people. And with the extreme risk protection orders, ERPO, that was the whole thing behind, the whole premise behind the red flag laws, that it was astonishing to find out how many people die from suicides or homicides. So it's over 50% of the population is dying from these particular groups. And if we can identify these people and the challenges that they have, especially if they have a record of mental disorders or things of that nature, then that will help us keep guns off the street. Another thing that I want to say about that, one of the bills, in fact, the bill I passed, House Bill 4142, which is now Public Act 10, is changing that definition from pistol to firearms, so you include all of these things when you're doing a background check. So we're putting things in place, and thank you so much for saying Rome was not built in a day. We need to celebrate because this was a long time coming. The victims at MSU and the victims of Holly did not have to occur. If these things would have happened when Senator Bayer and I first started the caucus, So the long and the short of the answer I'm saying here is thank you, and all the groups. Want to give a personal shout out once again, and maybe former Councilman Kermit Williams can expound on two outstanding groups that's worth noting that's working right here in Pontiac, and that's Pontiac Universal Crimes and Identify Your Dreams with Delea Sharp. Delea is a survivor just like I am, and then Raheem Harris does a lot of work right here in Pontiac. And Councilman, if you would be so kind just to give a little bit of background on these two phenomenal groups.
Okay. Thank you again, State Rep Carter. One of the key things that Identify Your Dreams does with Delea Samuel Sharp is they take care of survivors of gun violence. And so we've had a number of homicides in the urban communities that they deal with. And then with Pontiac Universal Crimes, Raheem Harris, they have a social media group and on the ground group that deals with vigils for people who got lost. We just had a 7-year-old get shot a couple of years ago in the city of Pontiac due to gun violence as she was getting home from school. So those kind of things happen. One of the things to answer that question, the next step is really making sure that this work is fully funded. This implementation is going to be so important. Education is going to be so important. We still have law enforcement officers that are talking about not enforcing certain provisions of the gun laws that we need to make sure is happening. So there needs to be community groups, especially for those marginalized communities that may need extra help with providing storage and other things to make sure their guns are there. So I think 3 of those things have to happen, but it starts with the budget. And so the next step, I commend the legislators on where they're going, but these are the first steps of many that we need to take in order to make Michigan safer. But it starts with actually fully funding that, because the implementation is almost more important than just the passage. So we took a huge step with passing these laws, but now we have to support the governor, support the legislator, and making sure that dollars go to the places that it needs to go to.
Thank you, Kermit. Celeste, Brenda, for your responses. There's a question from Rick Pluta from Michigan Radio. Rick, would you like to unmute yourself?
You're still muted, Rick.
Well, I'll ask Rick's question for him. Rick's question was, what can we expect in terms of final passage and signature of the Extreme Risks Protection Order bill, Representative Carter? It was a slightly different version that passed in the House than what passed in the Senate. What's your expectation about how quickly that will be finalized and signed into law?
My expectations is that it will happen rather quickly. Okay, I know it's very high on the governor's agenda, and so far everything that this legislature has worked on as far as gun reform, I'd like to say gun reform, because we just don't want to focus on the violence part of it. We want to focus on what we're actually trying to do to mitigate gun violence, and that's actually reform the laws. I am highly anticipated that once it comes back over to the House, it will be passed and it will go on to the governor's office for signature.
So you think this week, Representative Carter?
Waiting and see. Okay, because you know things happen, but we're definitely waiting to see. We'll know shortly. They just sent out the what they anticipate we're going to be doing in the House. I didn't see that quite yet.
Thank you. Any other final questions for our panelists? Okay.
I have an additional question, if that's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I know that the Michigan State Police, that there's a lot of reports right now regarding the expungement reform that was approved, and now people with and I don't know all the details, so I apologize in advance, but people with felonies now having a new access to firearms. Is there anything you would like to clarify in terms of firearm access and its relationship now with the expungement reform?
Is that for me, Celeste? Is that for me,
Yes,
Celeste?
I think so.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
you would probably
Okay.
be best equipped to answer that.
Okay, I did read something on it about that the new access because of the expungement or clean slate law would increase access to guns on the street. I have not seen any indication of that happening. I do know that for those of you who don't know about the clean slate expungement law that went into effect a couple days ago, that you can have 2 felonies and up to 3 misdemeanors if they qualify. That's another thing there too. If they qualify, they would be automatically dropped from your record. Okay. Now, as far as the Michigan State Police and their reaction to this, I have not heard anything from them, but that's worth us looking into as a residual of the clean slate law.
Thanks, Representative Carter.
You're welcome.
Any final questions before we close our meeting? All right. Well, I just wanted to again take a moment and celebrate the fact that together our communities fought and won the most significant gun safety legislation in decades. It's because we all worked together from Detroit to Marquette and made sure that we made our children's lives, our communities' lives, a higher priority than the profits of the gun industry. As Kermit said, politicians shouldn't be afraid of the NRA anymore. They should make sure that they're standing on the side of parents, families, students, and communities and supporting these laws. Thank you, everybody, and there'll be a recording and a release going out shortly.